Hello and welcome to a new episode of Under 360 English. Today we are going to discuss about how the so-called environmental racism as well as so-called environmental protection has been turned down India in terms of domestic production as well as the numbers pertains to the employability. Also, how it has been adversely affect India from coming out as a developed nation. First and foremost thing I would just want to clear is I don't have any political bias. Moreover, this is more or less like a narration, many from the history, and also we are more specifically concerned about the protests that went against Sterlite copper there in Thuthukudi, Tamil Nadu, and the ongoing protests that's happening there in Vizhinjam, Kerala. The Sterlite copper was a subsidiary of Vedanta Resource and the Vizhinjam port, that's a company under Adani Group. So in this episode, we are critically analyzing how these kind of vague pseudo-environmental protests brought down India or prevent India from becoming a developed nation, and who all are basically responsible or who has the interest to retain India still in its developing phase. So keep watching, stay tuned. So before we move further, let's have a quick look on the historical examples that generally we have faced recently from refraining ourselves from getting into the developed state. Since 2016, our central government has embarked on the Chardham highway project. Most of you have heard about it from the newspapers. So this was an ambitious design to expand 900 kilometers of roads into all-weather highway in the mountains of Uttarakhand. We all know about the connectivity issues of Uttarakhand. So besides the benefits of tourism and industry, the government, they claimed that it is needed for the roads to be at least 10 meter wide for army vehicles to pass, because we often have certain tiff with China. But environmental groups got into act, and in 2020, they got the Supreme Court to pass on order to restricting the width of the road to just 5.5 meter wide. After a long court battle, the government finally won the right to expand the road in December 2021 last year. But think of the years that we have lost in between and how much energy the government has been spent against their own citizen. And what about the superpower on the other side, that's China? Do you think China is waiting for the environmental clearance to build roads and railways that can rush their army troops to the Indian border? So eventually, who benefited from this delay? We have to think about it. Next comes the Sterlite plant, the plant owned by Vedanta Limited. There was a massive protest in 2018 against the Vedanta or Sterlite plant, Sterlite copper smelting plant there in 2018. Almost 20,000 people who were employed directly or indirectly with this massive manufacturing plant's operation, they lost their entire job as well as livelihood. Don't think that everyone working there were managers and they could able to fetch job in some other corporates. No, many local people were there, they were employed and they find their livelihood from the Sterlite plant. So within 2 years, India went from being a net exporter of copper, from there's a net importer of copper. Now we are hit with a copper import bill of around 2 billion every year. So this money is mostly goes to Chinese companies because they are running mines across the globe. Again, the question raises, eventually who has benefited out of these kind of environmental riots? The second instance is about the ongoing protest against the Vizhinjam deep sea port there in Kerala. If the port had been completed, it would have been given serious competition to Colombo port and the Chinese influence in the Indian Ocean. But apparently what happened, the project is leading to coastal erosion and environmental groups say that they can't afford that. So now the vizhinjam ongoing port project is also dragging to the legal tussles. Obviously, that will get delayed. Again, who is benefited out of this? Obviously, China and Colombo port. Colombo port is mainly controlled by China. So we could go on and on with more and more examples, but the common features between them are already clear. India lost out the jobs, economic growth suffers threat to its national security. Secondly, there is not much of political angle in any of these kind of issues. The only beneficiaries appear to be foreign interests, generally China. Remember that every delay comes at a cost. Even if protests and litigation are not ultimately successful, they have taken away the valuable, precious time and resources that could have been used elsewhere. So, even when the protesters lose, eventually the people ultimately benefited out of these kind of delays wins. Now we can just have a quick look on why environmental groups never threaten Western interests. They're in the Europe or in the US, they hardly find these kind of protests. Why? Do you think they don't have any these kind of projects? No. Now compare the same thing that is happening there in the Europe and much of the Western world in general. Ever since the war in Ukraine started, the energy crisis also started. So they moved, the European countries moved quickly to start their coal-fired power plants into operation. And the European parliaments, they voted to declare nuclear power and natural gas are the forms of green energy. Very ironic. They have their own justification, but they declared these two energies as green energy so that they won't get blamed. The European Union also became the top investor in the world's tallest dam located in Tajikistan. But on the other hand, what we have found there in Sardar Sarovar Dam, the farmers there, they cannot have a few meters added to the height of Sardar Sarovar Dam because they lost the farmland. Again, protest started. Now the question is, where were the environmental groups? They pretended to make some noise, but they fell into sleep quickly. They tweeted against it, but not with much thrust or sincerity. But on the other hand, the entire West, they unleashed a very widespread campaign to shame India for increasing the oil exports from Russia. But you have to keep it in mind that why we are somewhat insulated from fuel price hike for the past couple of months is just because of the fact that India is importing oil from Russia at a constant rate of $90 per barrel. Now let's have a quick look on what ultimately this West made the rush to insist the environment intact or conserve. The West is not that much bothered to conserve the environment, but on the other hand, they want the rest of the world to conserve the environment, especially Asia. Why so? We can find a few glimpses of hints from the book titled The Passing of the Great Race. That's published in 1916. Some of you might have read this book. That's written by Madison Grant. So this book theorized white people, specifically Northern Europeans with the lightest skin and blue eyes. They consider that as a superior race. As days goes by, the book warned the dominance of the Nordic people would be threatened by an increase in the population of other inferior races, brown-skinned or dark-skinned races. But the author, Madison Grant, was no fringe element. Indeed, he has one of the pioneers of the conservation movement, and she was the chairman of New York Zoological Society and a trustee of American Museum of Natural History. Don't think that it was this kind of thinking was just with Grant, but Osborne and Jordan was also contributed to this kind of a breed of free thinkers there in America. So these people, they believed that the government had the duty to regulate the pollution, to conserve the nature and get rid of the inferior races and undesirable people. So their reasoning was simple, and that was somewhat frightening when we think now. They think that the resources of the earth are finite As the environmentalist groups say today, there is no planet B. Obviously, we also know that. We consider that as a positive thing. And so these finite resources should belong to the superior races. For example, Osborne, he was the founder of American Eugenics Society. Their motto was nothing but Jews and non-white people don't deserve the same treatment as Nordic people. And David Jordan, he was one of the patrons of Human Betterment Foundation. And the ultimate aim of this organization was quite literally was to improve the humanity through compulsory sterilization of deemed to be unfit. Now the question is, who all are the unfit? The unfit people will be decided based on the skin color. That means the brown skinned as well as the dark skinned people will be considered as the unfit people to this society or to this planet. So in short, these kind of philosophies are there on air whether we agree it or not. More or less, the West, they want to conserve this planet for them, but they can't compromise their development or they can't control their carbon emissions. But on the other hand, they want to preserve this earth at the cost of third world countries. Third world countries should remain as third world countries, and ultimately the superior race, they need to be retained and the finite resources need to be retained. Directly or indirectly, the ripples of that reach throughout the world, and directly or indirectly, we are also suffering with that notion. I do agree that we have to conserve this earth, but ultimately, today belongs to us. A crippled today will not produce a prosperous tomorrow. So that's all for now. See you in the next episode. Till then, bye from Anop.